If you've ever traveled over an hour with a carload of kids, then you've probably heard one or more of these lines at some point. I'm thirsty. Can we stop? I gotta pee. She looked at me. That look. I'm hungry. He hit me. Are we almost there yet? If these bring back fond or not so fond memories of travel, then you have a pretty good idea of what it was like for Moses as he led the people of Israel across the wilderness to the promised land. There was nothing about the journey that wasn't open for debate, or better yet, complaint. They complained about the conditions, they complained about the leadership, they complained about the water. And when they got around to complaining about the food and wanting to return to the flesh pots of Egypt where they ate their fill, God intervened. And God announced that he would provide daily bread. Every evening, quail would descend upon the camp. And every morning there would be a fine, flaky, bread-like stuff on the ground. They didn't know what to call it, so they called it manna, which literally means, what is it? There would be enough manna each day, and on the sixth day there would be twice as much, so that no one had to gather or do work on the Sabbath. But there was one restriction, and that was you could not hoard it. Well, we know all too well how well that went, and how easy it is to get sucked in to the hoarding culture. Remember the toilet paper? Sure enough, they started pocketing just a little extra manna each day. Because you never know. What if God doesn't show up tomorrow? What if there isn't enough manna to go around? What if somebody steals my manna? What if somebody gets my share and I don't get any? I need to save some. And so they pocketed it and then were shocked when they woke up the next morning with stinky pockets because the manna had gone bad. It's hard to believe that God will provide, particularly in times of crisis. And yet that is the promise. That is our daily prayer. Give us today our daily bread. And yet we so often don't expect God to be there when we need God most. We need to take things into our hands. We need to hoard. We need to take control. We need to complain and blame. But the truth is, God will provide. Oh, it may not be in exactly the way we wish God would provide. One of my favorite story cycles in the Old Testament are the stories surrounding the prophet Elijah. Elijah got in trouble with the government. He criticized King Ahab and Queen Jezebel's leadership, announced God's judgment upon them, and they turned around and threatened to kill him. And so he spent most of his ministry on the run. And periodically, Elijah would just say, I've had enough, I just want to die. And when those times came, God provided exactly what Elijah needed. Probably not what he wanted, but what he needed to get going. The first incident, God shows up through the ravens and brings him food. Now, if you've ever followed the history of ravens, they tend to feed on roadkill. So you can imagine what they brought to Elijah. And then there was the incident with the widow and her last meal. Finally, it's the angels who bring Elijah angel food cake. Even when he gives up, holes up in his cave, quarantines, says, I've had it, I'm going nowhere. God shows up in a still small voice and sends him packing. It is the same kind of thing in the New Testament, where Jesus feeds multitudes in those dark and dreary, lonely hours of the night with nothing but a few fish and a couple of loaves of bread. The promise is that God will provide, particularly in times of need, even when we don't expect it, even in the most unexpected ways. But God's promise is that he will be with us, and he will get us through this crisis as well, and bring us into the promised land, a land flowing with milk and honey, a little better food than roadkill. Give us today our daily bread. It is a prayer and a promise. All who hunger gladly, gladly, holy manna is our bread. Come from wilderness and wandering, here in truth we will be fed. You that learn for days of fullness, all around us is our food. Taste and see the grace eternal. Taste and see that God is good. All who hunger, never strangers, seeker be a welcome guest. Come from restlessness and roaming, here in joy we keep the feast. We that once were lost and scattered, in communion's love have stood. Taste and see the grace eternal. Taste and see that God is good. All who hunger sing together, Jesus is the living bread. Come from lowliness and longing, here in peace we have been fed. Blessed are those who from this table live their lives in gratitude. Taste and see the grace eternal. Taste and see that God is good.